Morning. Now, welcome to the Stitch Along. We're going to be starting the Stitch Along tomorrow, technically on day one, looking at how to transfer the pattern. But before we start that, there are a couple of things that would be useful to know about the thread before we get going on that. So hopefully you've managed to choose some thread. I use the DMC thread that you can see here. And basically each DMC colour thread has its own code, which you can see on the label there. Now, in the pattern, it'll give you the codes for the colours that I've used in my sewing, but you can use any colours that you like. Now, what you're going to need to do when you get the thread, obviously you're going to have to take some of the thread out because you're going to need about 50 centimetres length for each of the parts of your stitching. Now, when you've got the thread like this, the best thing to do is when you see there's two tabs there, if you pull the loose strand or end of thread from the tab that has the number on, then what happens is you can pull as much thread out as you like and it doesn't get tangled up. If you choose to pull it from the end where the DMC is, quite often it'll get knotted. Okay, so the first thing you need to do is pull some thread out. Okay, now once you've done that, you, as I mentioned, need to cut approximately 50 centimetres. If you do it too short, you're going to have to constantly be rethreading your needle, which you don't want to do. But if you do it too long, again, your thread can be knotted. Now, I tend to do this by using my arm as a measurement because I don't want to get the ruler out every time. It doesn't need to be exact. So I take the tip of the thread in my thumb and forefinger, and then I stretch it to my elbow, and then I add about another 10 to 15 centimetres, and then use some sharp scissors to cut. And then once you've done that, you will need to separate threads out, or strands of thread out. Now, as you can see here, each of these is made up of 6 strands. And depending on the embroidery pattern, depends on how many strands you'll use for each stitch. If you're doing quite delicate work, you'll probably only use 1 to 2 strands, whereas if you're doing stitches that are a little bit more bulky, you might choose anything from 3 to 6 strands. Now, most of the stitches in the stitch along will be 2 or 3 strands, so you'll need to separate them out. So what you do for this is you'll separate one of the strands out, hold the end of that strand, and then hold the other strands with your thumb and forefinger, and then just pull the single strand out and lie that down. And if you need 2 strands, you'll do that a second time. So just separate the strand out, again, pull that strand and separate it out. And when you come to thread your needle, you just need to pop those 2 strands back together. Wet your thumb and forefinger, wet the end of your thread, and then you can thread that through the eye of your needle. Now, once you've threaded your needle, don't forget to tie a knot in the far end so that when you first start your stitching, the thread doesn't pull straight through the fabric. Now, I tend to just do a little knot like that. If you're using just 1 strand of thread, you might want to do a double knot just to make it a little bit fatter so it doesn't fit through the fabric. And you're now ready to begin.